The League of Nations was the money cartel's first attempt at world control, but Tsar Nicholas II of Russia caught on to their plot and sabotaged it. That proved to be a deadly mistake. Schiff, Warburg, Rockefeller, Harriman, and Morgan backed the uprisings that led to the 1917 Russian Revolution. Their strategy was to finance both sides of wars and revolutions, which gave them control over the winners, the losers, and the outcome. Between 1918 and 1921, 14 million Russians died from war and starvation under Lenin's Bolsheviks. By 1919, Lenin ran up a national debt to the Rothschild banksters of $60 billion, which put Russia firmly under their control. As Mayor Rothschild once said, "Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes her laws." To this day, the Rothschilds have stopped the heirs to the Tsar's fortunes from claiming their deposits held in Rothschild banks. Those fortunes are now worth an estimated $50 billion. Joseph Stalin, who was financed by the same money cartel, replaced Lenin as Russia's brutal new dictator. Using terror and death threats, Stalin's job was to industrialize Russia and turn communism into a powerful counterforce to democracy. Manufactured conflicts between these two powerful political forces would be the ideal excuse for all future wars and for dividing, conquering, and ruling the world.
But profits were not the only motive. There was also revenge. The money changers never forgave the Tsars for their support of Lincoln during the Civil War. Also, Russia was the last major European nation to refuse to give in to the privately owned central bank scheme. 3 years after World War I broke out, the Russian Revolution toppled the Tsar and installed the scourge of communism. Jacob Schiff of Kuhn Loeb and Company bragged from his deathbed that he had spent $20 million towards the defeat of the Tsar. Money was funneled from England to support the revolution as well. Why would some of the richest men in the world financially back communism, the system that was openly vowing to destroy the so-called capitalism that made them wealthy? Researcher Gary Allen explained it this way.
If one understands that socialism is not a share the wealth program, but is, in reality, a method to consolidate and control the wealth, then the seeming paradox of super-rich men promoting socialism becomes no paradox at all. Instead, it becomes logical, even the perfect tool of power-seeking megalomaniacs. Communism, or more accurately socialism, is not a movement of the downtrodden masses, but of the economic elite.
As W. Cleon Skousen put it in his 1970 book, The Naked Capitalist,
power from any source tends to create an appetite for additional power. It was almost inevitable that the super-rich would one day aspire to control not only their own wealth, but the wealth of the whole world. To achieve this, they were perfectly willing to feed the ambitions of the power-hungry political conspirators who were committed to the overthrow of all existing governments and the establishments of a central worldwide dictatorship.
But what if these revolutionaries get out of control and try to seize power from the super-rich? After all, it was Mao Zedong who in 1938 stated his position concerning power. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. The Wall Street, London axis elected to take the risk. The master planners attempted to control revolutionary communist groups by feeding them vast quantities of money when they obeyed and contracting their money supply or even financing their opposition if they got out of control. Lenin began to understand that although he was the absolute dictator of the new Soviet Union, he was not pulling the financial strings. Someone else was silently in control.
The state does not function as we desired. The car does not obey. A man is at the wheel and seems to lead it, but the car does not drive in the desired direction. It moves as another force wishes.
I worked for many, many years and put my life at risk several times. I was not in the military, but put my life at risk several times in order to defeat communism. I spent my whole life trying to defeat communism. We were not trying to defeat, we were not trying to become hostile to the people of Russia. We were against the Soviet Union, which is not Russia. Russia and the United States should be best friends because we face the same ultimate enemies of a radical Islamic movement that would murder our own people, and yes, an emerging China that hasn't had one bit of reform at all. Yet we have placed Russia, it's sanction after sanction on Russia that has had dramatic reform, whose churches are full. Yet we give China what? We give China technology, we give them subsidies, we give them recognition, and yet they murder religious believers even as we do. And we ignore that. The double standard that we have for Russia has been aimed at pushing them into a hostile relationship with us, and I oppose that whole concept.
Question: who, beside Donald Trump, is more loathed and maligned by the mainstream mockingbird media? The answer, of course, is Vladimir Putin. And the last thing the Clinton, Soros, New World Order mafia wants is closer ties between Russia and the United States. In fact, those that would rabble-rouse and beat the drums of war would like nothing more than conflict between the United States and Russia. What if I were to tell you that the same mockingbird mainstream media that has covered up the global child pedophilia rings, including the Pizzagate story, is also refusing to report about Vladimir Putin's knowledge of the elite's penchant for pedophilia? In his 2016 Christmas speech, Vladimir Putin dropped some bombshells on the New World Order that were completely ignored by the mainstream U.S. press. And in his Christmas speech, we see some startling similarities between Putin and Trump, both of whom seem to recognize the fact that the New World Order powers are aligned against sovereign states, aligned against Christianity, aligned against traditional morals, and aligned against the family. In his incredibly important speech, Putin says, "We see that many Euro-Atlantic states have taken the way where they deny or reject their own roots, including their Christian roots, which form the basis of Western civilization. In these countries, the moral basis and any traditional identity are being denied. National, religious, cultural, and even gender identities are being denied or relativized. There, politics treats a family with many children as equal to a homosexual partnership. Faith in God is equal to faith in Satan." And guys, here's the Pizzagate DC pedo ring bombshell that Putin dropped. And I quote, "The excesses and exaggeration of political correctness in these countries indeed leads to serious consideration for the legitimization of parties that promote the propaganda of pedophilia." Putin clearly knows about the elite's penchant for pedophilia, and Tom DeLay himself has warned the American people.
Well, we've already found a secret memo coming out of the Justice Department. They're now going to go after 12 new perversions, things like bestiality, polygamy, having sex with little boys and making that legal.
Putin continues, "The people in many European states are actually ashamed of their religious affiliations and are indeed frightened to speak about them." Guys, as a side note, for those who've never read the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is claimed to be nothing more than a hoax or a forgery, I'd encourage you to read those protocols and then consider the war that is being waged that Putin is describing in this speech, and then ask yourself, is something behind the scenes driving this agenda? And do Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin stand in some opposition to it? Putin says Christian holidays and celebrations are abolished or neutrally renamed, as if one were ashamed of those Christian holidays. With this method, one hides away the deeper moral value of these celebrations. And of course, he's referring to the birth of Jesus Christ and the rebirth of the human race through the blood of Jesus Christ. Putin says, and these countries try to force this model onto other countries globally. I am deeply convinced that this is a direct way to the degradation and primitivization of culture. This leads to deeper demographic and moral crisis in the West. What can be a better evidence for the moral crisis of a human society than the loss of its reproductive function? And today, nearly all developed Western countries cannot survive reproductively, not even with the help of migrants. Without the moral values that are rooted in Christianity and other world religions, without rules and moral values which have formed and been developed over millennia, people will inevitably lose their human dignity. We can see the degradation of family in our own society tearing us apart. Putin stands in opposition to that degradation. And yet the mainstream mockingbird media would label this man an enemy of humanity and an enemy of the United States. Putin continues, and we think it is right and natural to defend and preserve these moral values. One has to respect the right of every minority to self-determination, but at the same time there cannot and must not be any doubt about the rights of the majority. And here's where Putin starts to sound a lot like some of the things Donald Trump said when he was running for president. Quote, at the same time as this process at a national level, we observe on an international level the attempts to create a unipolar, unified model of the world, to relativize and remove institutions of international right and national sovereignty. Trump himself has said the number one way to preserve peace and prosperity is through the sovereign state.
We will no longer surrender this country or its people to the false song of globalism. The nation state remains the true foundation for happiness and harmony. I am skeptical of international unions that tie us up and bring America down. And under my administration, we will never enter America into any agreement that reduces our ability to control our own affairs.
And the sovereign state stands in stark opposition to the Rockefeller, Rothschild, Soros desire for a new world order, one world government. Putin says, in such a unipolar, unified world, there is no place for sovereign states. Such a world would need merely vassals. And when he refers to vassals, think of the way the EU is set up. Thank goodness it's falling apart. But the EU has unelected bureaucrats in Brussels that supersede democracy, that supersede the will of the people, and that in turn only enforce the tyranny of the banking elite which controls the EU. And in this clip, Putin concludes, from a historical perspective, such a unipolar world would mean the surrender of one's own identity and of God-created diversity. Guys, when he says the surrender of one's own identity, it is exactly what the New World Order wants. It wants to cloud the lines between men and women, between right and wrong. It wants willing subjects that will bow down before the technological beast system of one world government, of one world currency, of the will of the banking elite, the satanic banking elite, as exemplified by Pizzagate, by Pedogate, by Jimmy Savile, and those that would cover up the crimes against children. The most important part of this speech, and I'll allow Putin to say it in his own words.
Политкорректности доходит до того, что всерьез говорится о регистрации партий, ставящих своей целью пропаганду педофилии.
Thanks for watching, and for real news 24/7, visit us at sgtreport.com.
Ephesians 5:11. Take no part in unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. And interestingly, in verse 12, it says, for it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret.
Okay.
The racist Russian
бешеную русофобию в своей стране,
Russophobia, which is developing here in the US. What kind of advice you can give me to help to clear things up, to help my compatriots, to the people of great America, to make them realize that Russia is not an enemy?
First of all, I really appreciate your call. So, as head of Russia, I know what's the sentiment of our people. We don't treat America as our foe. And twice in history, as you probably know, when it was really difficult, we joined our efforts and were allies in 2 world wars. The Russian Empire, at a certain period in time, helped the United States to gain independence and supported the U.S. Right now, we are seeing Russophobic sentiment in the U.S. We believe this is due to the increasing political struggle. I don't want to give you any advice. I just want to thank you for your stance. We know that there are a lot of friends out there in the U.S., friends of Russia. My U.S. colleagues told me, and we also had opinion polls several months ago that say that we have a lot of friends out there in the U.S. Unfortunately, we have this hysteric atmosphere in the media. It must have an impact, but definitely there are a lot of people here in Russia that have a lot of respect to the achievements of the American people and hope that eventually our relations would go back to normal. And we are very much interested in it, both us and the US.
Russia remembers the Soviet triumph over Nazi Germany in World War II. The streets of Moscow to watch the passing weaponry. But this year, there are some unusual guests. For the first time, Russia asked American troops to march in Red Square. I'm kind of nervous, but I'm excited. This is the first time America's done this, so I'm pretty proud. We've actually marched about 5 times for a rehearsal. The Kremlin's decision to invite the Americans to Russia's most important secular holiday was a sign of improved relations.
The Russian military is definitely on top of things. Serving the Orthodox Christian soldiers in the Army and Navy, it debuted a flying church along with a division of priests experienced in parachuting and assembly. The air-dropped house of worship is said to be the first in the world. Paratroopers were recently photographed holding exercises a little over 100 miles away from Moscow. A Russian news outlet reported that some of the paratroopers were actually priests. A Western military district spokesperson states that the priests work to meet the spiritual demands of military personnel and to improve morale and discipline in military units. In March of 2012, the Russian media covered the story of such a church in the works. Images showed that the religious structure had everything required for prayer services, including crucifixes and bells. It possesses its own refrigerator and air conditioning unit. All kinds of parachute drops are routinely made as part of military operations around the world. Hummers were airdropped into the battlefield during the Iraq War operations. Even dogs have been known to parachute along with soldiers on military missions. Once on ground, cameras are attached to them and used for getting enemy positions to the infantry.
Landed in German-occupied Serbia, but got help from Serbian resistance fighters led by General Draza Mihailovic, a U.S. and British ally.
Those people had it pretty doggone rough. Didn't have much to give, but they gave.
And they kept the U.S. airmen safe for weeks until the U.S. government got word that there were 50 downed soldiers in Yugoslavia. The United States sent in OSS agents on a daring rescue mission known as Operation Halyard. Fremont resident Arthur Jebillion was one of those men who risked his life.
They asked if I would go as a radio man. Well, immediately did it in a heartbeat. I said certainly.
When he got there, he found not 50 airmen, but 250, and the number was growing.
So we stayed, and what turned out to be what started as a 10-day mission, we were there for almost 6 months and brought out 500 airmen in that time.
One by one, C-47s landed on a makeshift runway that the Americans and Serbs built by hand.
We were so pleased that these planes were coming in, and this was what we had worked hard for, and getting that airstrip built, and it made us real happy.
But when they returned to the U.S., the government said they couldn't share their incredible story.
We weren't supposed to tell them how we got out. I think they wanted to keep that a secret.
These veterans feel the U.S. didn't give General Mihailovic credit for helping them. By the time the rescue happened, the U.S. and Britain had abandoned Mihailovic as an ally. They say false information was given that he was a traitor and collaborating with the Germans. The U.S. and Britain began siding with communist leader General Joseph Tito instead.
I don't know why the State Department will not admit that they made a mistake when they abandoned Mihailovic. He was voted Man of the Year on Time magazine in 1941, and then hailed as a hero, and then turn around and call him a collaborator simply to justify favoring Tito.
When the war ended, they say Tito put Mihailovic on trial, quickly found him guilty, and executed him by firing squad. The hundreds of rescued airmen were devastated they couldn't testify at the trial.
The only thing we ever wanted was to acknowledge that he did help us, that the Serbian people helped us, that he was not a traitor, that we made a mistake in backing Tito. We backed the wrong man.
In 2005, Jebillion, Musgrove, and a few other airmen presented Mihailovic's daughter with the Legion of Merit. It was awarded posthumously to her father by President Harry Truman for aiding the American soldiers. It was a big step in a lifelong mission, fighting to expose the truth.
We have a story to tell. We may be small, but we're vociferous, and we'll tell it till the day we die, won't we?
Amen.
Jennifer Morris, News 11.
A soft coup is underway right here in the United States of America in an attempt to overturn November's election results and forcibly remove a duly elected president from office. Sinister forces quickly aligning in what is becoming now, in my mind, a clear and present danger. That is tonight's very important opening monologue. All right, so here in America, we're at a turning point tonight with forces now forming an alliance to try and remove President Trump from office. It's that serious. Now, here are the 5 dangers we are facing, especially the president. One, you've got the Destroy Trump media that has been lying to you now, provable lies for 11 months, nonstop. Trump, Russia, collusion. black helicopter theories. No evidence whatsoever. 2, you've got what I've been calling the deep state, selectively leaking information to damage the president and anyone associated with him. 3, Special Counsel Mueller's investigation mission creep I've been telling you about. Well, it's now turned into an out-of-control, what is a political witch hunt. It needs to be stopped. 4, all this manufactured turmoil putting President Trump's agenda in jeopardy, which ends up directly impacting every one of you out there, the American people. And 5, this effort to override the will of the American people, change the results of a presidential election, is now creating a national security crisis. America is now suffering from a massive informational crisis because, I call them the Destroy Trump media, has routinely been exposed now. Agenda-driven propagandists, more than happy to push debunked tinfoil hat conspiracy theories. For example, the media relentlessly peddling one of the biggest lies in American history, that is, that the president colluded with the Russians. Now, that's because members of the media are nothing more than left-wing ideologues pretending to be journalists. Remember, they're the ones that colluded with Hillary Clinton, exposed by WikiLeaks in the 2016 election. The media has one clear, shared goal in mind, and that is to damage, stop, and destroy Trump's presidency. Sadly, it appears by any means necessary. We have been highlighting right here on this program, night after night, just how unhinged these people have become. And they don't care about facts. Obviously, they don't care about the truth, which is why the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CNN, all exposed as having gotten their reporting wrong. But the Destroy Trump media, they're not the only ones whose collusion narrative, by the way, is completely crumbled. Take a list at the long list of Democrats admitting no evidence of collusion. Zero. Zip. Take a look.
Well, the allegation, of course, is that the Russians in the hacking and dumping of documents in the election had essentially relationships with Trump campaign people. But I'm not prepared to say that there's proof you could take to a jury.
Do you agree with this conclusion that the president has reached, that there was no evidence of collusion?
We haven't seen any of that whatsoever, George. We've been looking and showing everything that they possibly have. That has not led to that.
The next threat, and perhaps the most dangerous, the deep state. That is the unelected, what I call the fourth branch of government, consisting of a lot of Obama holdovers, anti-Trump bureaucrats who now are routinely targeting the president, his administration, with selective leaking to hurt him. Now, this deep state works closely with the Destroy Trump media to disseminate false information about the president and his administration. And what's even more dangerous, more sinister about the deep state is that they're willing to break the law, leaking classified information, like in the case of General Flynn. Then you have the former FBI director, James Comey, admitting under oath he had his memo leaked to the New York Times. He had a goal. He wanted the appointment of a special counsel. And a prime example is the unmasking of General Flynn. That was a violation of the Espionage Act. That's a crime. That's a felony, by the way. And then Flynn's Fourth Amendment rights, by the way, totally trampled on. You've heard nothing about it. There's no investigation there. Why? Again, the deep state, they don't care. They're only concerned with taking down President Trump and President Trump's associates. Then you've got number three, the special counsel. Look at Mueller's investigation mission creep. Remember, President Trump has called this the greatest political witch hunt in American history? Well, I'm here to tell you the president's right. Mueller's sole purpose was to investigate so-called Trump-Russia collusion. But Mueller is now expanding that investigation, and he's digging into finances and Jared Kushner and obstruction of justice. And guess what? He's not going to stop there. Why? Because there is no Trump-Russia collusion, so he has to move on to other things. And I'll tell you what's most alarming about this. Mueller is having massive conflicts of interest. He should recuse himself. He's incapable of carrying out a fair and impartial investigation. Now, Mueller needs to end this witch hunt right now. He's best friends with James Comey. The two have been best friends for a long time. And who do you think Mueller is going to side with when it comes to the president and his word versus James Comey's word? That's pretty obvious, pretty unfair. And then there's the fact that members of Mueller's investigative team, the lawyers he's hiring, many of them donated big bucks to, let's see, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton. And on top of that, perhaps most sinister, one of the lawyers Mueller has hired actually was Clinton's attorney at the Clinton Foundation, defending the Clinton Foundation against getting you information and preventing Freedom of Information Act requests. Oh, isn't that great about the foundation? Now, imagine for a second, just stand back, if Republicans ever try to pull anything like this. You know, let's hire Donald Trump's lawyer to investigate President Hillary Clinton. The left-wing outrage would be like nothing you've ever seen before. If Mueller wants to investigate actual crimes, actual collusion, by the way, a real Donald Trump or a real conspiracy with Russia, maybe he should focus attention on other things. Let's start with Loretta Lynch. Let's start with the Clintons. James Comey testified that Lynch influenced his investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server. Is that not the textbook definition of obstruction of justice? And if Democrats and the media want to talk about collusion, well, we can talk about collusion. You know, was it wrong for Loretta Lynch to meet Bill Clinton on the tarmac, or to convince James Comey not to say investigation but a matter? Or, as Sarah Carter and John Solomon have reported, was it wrong when she reported that Comey confronted her as having been in the tank for Hillary all along and put the kibosh on any indictment? What about when serving as Secretary of State? Hillary Clinton handed over 20% of America's uranium to who? Oh, Vladimir Putin, the Russians, the corrupt Uranium One deal. And while people involved in that deal donating, kicking back big dollars, millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation, her husband doubling his speaking fees in Moscow. All this manufactured turmoil from the left, the Democrats, destroy Trump media, the deep state, is creating a completely dysfunctional environment in Washington and for the country. And you, the American people, you're the ones suffering because these forces are slowing down what you voted for. A president enacting the agenda he promised means fewer jobs, less economic growth, no border wall, no tax reform, no repealing, replacing Obamacare, no getting people out of poverty, off of food stamps, back in the labor force, buying homes at a 51-year low. The longer these attacks continue, the longer it will take for you, the American people, to benefit for what you voted for, the president's policies and agenda. And all of this is now creating a very clear present danger to the country. The left is suffering well beyond Trump derangement syndrome. It's completely unhinged. Look at how vile some of their rhetoric has been.
Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House. Pigs in a blanket! I like bacon! Pigs in a blanket! I like bacon!
I'll put Mr. Burgess up against Sean Hannity. He'll tear him up.
The press always asks me, don't I wish I were debating him? No, I wish we were in high school. I could take him behind the gym.
I think a more accurate football metaphor might have been the GOP just kicked America in the balls. Thank you.
It is a weird tension. I think it's a dangerous time for the First Amendment and for the free press in this country. And at the same time, we're oddly influential with the guy who wants to kill us.
How dare he say that to the crowd? How dare he say the things he does? Of course I want to punch him in the face.
Right.
You want to punch the president in the face and Madonna dreaming of blowing up the White House? Now, think about this. Now we have severed heads, Trump lookalikes in an ISIS pose. Now we have assassination lists in Alexandria, Virginia, and Republicans targeted for assassination. You don't think that's insanity? You don't think the left, their deranged hate and rhetoric, you don't think that this could ever be reconciled with, for example, some of the actions that's happening here? This is now reaching a point of no return. It's beyond serious. If these forces are successful, this country will not survive. If they continue with lies, propaganda, misinformation, and outright conspiracy theories, where do the people go to get their country back? And why don't they go after the people that we know committed actual crimes? Why aren't they investigating Loretta Lynch, Hillary Clinton, the deep state, the leaks that have been coming out, all illegal? Why are they going after only President Trump? Now, by the way, just so you know, this isn't about just President Trump. This isn't about just people around the president. This is more deeply about you, the American people. You know, it's a big middle finger right in your face. You know, these people don't care about you. Mueller, Rosenstein, Comey, Deep State, Destroy Trump Media, Weak Republicans, they're not acting on your behalf. They don't seem to care how all of this is impacting you, your families, those of you out of work, in poverty, on food stamps, those of you out of the labor force, 95 million of you. You know what? They think they're smarter than you. They know better than you. It's not about you to them. It's not about what you want. This is about what they want. If you're sick and tired of it, I think you should let your congressmen and women know. I think you should look at the media tonight and ask, are they telling you the truth anymore? We're at a turning point. You, the American people, have a profound choice to make here. You can let this continue to happen, watch the country descend into chaos. You can sit back, or you can stand up and fight for what you voted for back in November.